College life can be a whirlwind of emotions, especially when you're thrown into close quarters with a complete stranger. That's exactly what happened to me during my freshman year. I still remember the day I moved into Westlake Hall, lugging my overpacked suitcases up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Just my luck. The hallways buzzed with excited chatter as families helped their children settle into their new homes away from home. I was both terrified and thrilled to be starting this new chapter of my life, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold over the next few months. When I first met Jordan, my assigned roommate, I was immediately struck by his confidence. He walked into our shared dorm room like he owned the place, flashing a smile that could probably charm the strictest professor on campus. "Hey, I'm Jordan," he said, extending his hand. "Looks like we'll be living together this year." His handshake was firm, his eyes a striking blue that contrasted with his dark, slightly messy hair. I introduced myself as Alex, trying to match his confidence but probably failing miserably. From the very beginning, Jordan and I were different in almost every way possible. I was the type who color-coded my notes and planned my study schedule weeks in advance. Jordan, on the other hand, seemed to operate on pure charisma and last-minute inspiration. He was a business major who believed networking was more important than textbooks, while I was majoring in computer science and believed in the sanctity of quiet study time. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment. I tried to establish some ground rules about quiet hours and shared spaces, but Jordan had a way of agreeing to everything with that charming smile and then completely forgetting about our conversation the next day. It wasn't that he was intentionally inconsiderate. He just lived in the moment in a way I never could. Our differences became more apparent as the semester progressed. Jordan's social circle expanded exponentially, while I made a few close friends in my computer science classes. He would come back to our room at all hours, sometimes with friends in tow, laughing and talking loudly as if it wasn't 2 a.m., and I didn't have an 8 a.m. class the next day. I'd pull my pillow over my head, trying to block out the noise and the growing frustration I felt toward my roommate. But here's the thing about Jordan that made it impossible to stay mad at him for long. He was genuinely kind. He'd bring me coffee when he noticed I was pulling an all-nighter. He'd invite me to parties, even though he knew I'd probably decline. He seemed to genuinely want me to be part of his world, which was both flattering and terrifying. As the weeks went by, I found myself noticing things about Jordan that I hadn't before. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, how he ran his hand through his hair when he was stressed about an upcoming test. The fact that despite his seemingly carefree attitude, he never missed a class and always turned in his assignments on time. I started to realize that my frustration with him was complicated by another feeling altogether: attraction. This realization hit me like a ton of bricks one night as I watched him get ready for a party. He was trying on different shirts, asking for my opinion as if I had any fashion sense whatsoever. "What about this one?" he asked, holding up a dark blue button-down that I knew would make his eyes look even more intense. "It looks good," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart did somersaults in my chest. What was happening to me? I had never been attracted to my roommates before, not in high school when I shared a room at summer camp, and certainly not now when it could make my living situation unbearably awkward. I tried to push these feelings aside, focusing instead on my studies and the growing pile of assignments that seemed to multiply every time I looked away. But living in such close quarters made it impossible to ignore Jordan or the effect he had on me. Every morning when he emerged from the bathroom with just a towel wrapped around his waist, droplets of water still clinging to his shoulders, I had to pretend to be deeply engrossed in my textbook. The situation came to a head during midterm week. I had 3 exams back-to-back and was more stressed than I'd ever been in my life. Jordan, seemingly oblivious to my state of mind, decided to host a study group in our room. And by study group, I mean a gathering of 6 of his friends who spent more time talking about their weekend plans than actually studying. I tried to concentrate on my notes, but the constant chatter and laughter made it impossible. After an hour of this torture, I finally snapped. "Can you guys please keep it down? Some of us are actually trying to study here." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. Jordan looked surprised, then apologetic. "Sorry, Alex. We'll take it to the common room." They packed up their books and left, but not before I caught the hurt look in Jordan's eyes. I felt terrible immediately. Yes, they had been loud, but I could have handled it better. I could have asked politely, or simply gone to the library instead of lashing out. I tried to focus on my studies after they left, but guilt kept gnawing at me. When Jordan returned a few hours later, I apologized for my outburst. "No worries," he said with that easy smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I should have been more considerate. I know how important these exams are to you. His maturity in handling the situation only made me feel worse. The next few days were tense. Jordan seemed to be walking on eggshells around me, keeping his music low and his conversations brief. I missed his usual exuberance, the way he burst into the room with some wild story about his day. I wanted to tell him that he didn't need to change who he was, that I was the one who needed to be more flexible, but the words stuck in my throat. Then came the night that changed everything. I had just finished my last midterm and was looking forward to a quiet evening of decompression. No studying, no stress, just me and maybe a movie on my laptop. I returned to our room to find it empty, which was unusual for a Thursday night. Jordan was almost always around, getting ready for some social event or another. I took advantage of the solitude, changing into my most comfortable pajamas and settling into bed with my laptop. I was halfway through an episode of my favorite show when the door burst open and Jordan stumbled in, clearly a few drinks past sober. He was with his friend Mike, both of them laughing about something that had happened at the party they'd just left. "Alex," Jordan exclaimed when he saw me. "You should have come out tonight." It was epic. He flopped down on his bed, still in his jacket and shoes. "Maybe next time," I said, though we both knew there wouldn't be a next time. Parties weren't really my scene, especially during midterm week. Mike crashed on our futon, declaring he was too drunk to make it back to his own dorm. Jordan offered him a blanket and a pillow, playing the gracious host even in his inebriated state. I tried to go back to my show, but the constant commentary from Jordan and Mike made it impossible to focus. "Guys, I'm really tired," I finally said. "Can we call it a night?" Jordan looked at me with those blue eyes, now slightly unfocused from alcohol. Sure. Sorry, Alex. We'll be quiet." But their whispered conversations and occasional bursts of laughter continued well into the night. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, it was 3 a.m. and I was woken by movement in my bed. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I felt the mattress dip and a warm body slide under my covers. I froze, my heart racing as I realized what was happening. Jordan had crawled into my bed. "Jordan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" There was no response except for the sound of his breathing, which was deep and even. Was he already asleep? Or was he pretending to be? I lay there, rigid with shock and confusion, very aware of the heat radiating from his body just inches from mine. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he so drunk that he had mistaken my bed for his own? That seemed unlikely given the layout of our room. Was this some kind of joke or dare? But Jordan wasn't cruel, and this seemed beyond the realm of his usual pranks, which left the possibility that made my heart beat even faster. Was this deliberate? Did he want to be close to me? I didn't know what to do. Wake him up and ask him to go back to his own bed. That would be the logical choice. But something kept me from speaking, from moving, from doing anything that might break this strange, charged moment. So I lay there, listening to his breathing, feeling the occasional brush of his arm against mine when he shifted in his sleep. Mike was snoring softly from the futon, oblivious to the drama unfolding a few feet away. The digital clock on my desk cast a soft red glow over the room, marking the slow passage of time as I remained awake, hyper-aware of Jordan's presence beside me. As the night wore on, my initial shock gave way to a different kind of tension. There was something undeniably intimate about sharing a bed, even in these bizarre circumstances. I found myself noticing details I'd never had the opportunity to observe before. The faint scent of his cologne mixed with the smell of whatever drinks he'd had at the party, the way his breathing changed as he fell into deeper sleep. The warmth of his body creating a cocoon of heat under my blankets. My mind wandered back to all the moments over the past few months when I'd caught Jordan looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The times he'd chosen to stay in and watch a movie with me instead of going out with his friends. The casual touches that lingered just a second too long to be purely platonic. Had I been misreading the situation all along? Was there something more to our relationship than just being roommates who occasionally got on each other's nerves? These thoughts kept me awake until the first light of dawn began to filter through our blinds. Mike stirred on the futon, groaning as he woke up with what was undoubtedly a massive hangover. I quickly closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I wasn't ready to face the reality of the morning, to have to acknowledge what had happened and potentially have an awkward conversation about boundaries and personal space. I felt Jordan stir beside me, his body tensing as he woke up. There was a moment of stillness, and I knew he was realizing where he was. Then, carefully, trying not to wake me, or so he thought, he slipped out of my bed and padded back to his own. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed, giving him the privacy of believing his nighttime wandering had gone unnoticed. Mike left soon after, mumbling thanks and apologies as he gathered his things. Once he was gone, I finally woke up, stretching and yawning as if I'd had a perfectly normal night's sleep. "Morning," Jordan said, his voice slightly hoarse. He was sitting on his bed, scrolling through his phone, not quite meeting my eyes. "Morning," I replied, trying to sound casual. "How was the party?" "Good," he said, "though I'm paying for it now." He rubbed his temples, wincing slightly. "Sorry if we were too loud when we came in." This was my opening, my chance to bring up what had happened. But looking at him sitting there, vulnerable in his hangover, I couldn't do it. What if I was wrong about his intentions? What if it had been a drunken mistake that he was now too embarrassed to acknowledge? Or worse, what if he didn't even remember doing it? "It's fine," I said instead. I was pretty out of it anyway. The day proceeded with a strange undercurrent of tension. We moved around each other carefully, both of us seemingly engaged in our own activities while being hyper-aware of the other's presence. Jordan spent most of the day recovering from his hangover, alternating between napping and watching videos on his phone with his headphones on, uncharacteristically considerate of my space. I tried to focus on a coding project, but my mind kept drifting back to the feeling of Jordan sliding into my bed, the weight of his body next to mine, the questions that had kept me awake for hours. By evening, the unaddressed elephant in the room had grown so large that it was hard to breathe around it. We ordered pizza for dinner, eating in relative silence as we sat on our respective beds. Finally, unable to bear it anymore, I decided to approach the subject indirectly. "So, do you remember much from last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jordan looked up from his pizza, a flicker of something: alarm? Embarrassment, crossing his face before he composed himself. "Most of it," he said. "Why? Did I do something stupid?" This was it. My chance to clear the air. But looking at his face, I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted clarity. What if the truth was disappointing? What if he had a perfectly innocent explanation that would make me feel foolish for having spent the day constructing elaborate scenarios in my head? "No," I said finally. "Just wondering. You were pretty wasted when you came in." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, tequila shots were involved. Never a good idea." And just like that, the moment passed. We finished our pizza, watched a movie on Jordan's laptop, sitting side by side on his bed, close but not touching, and eventually turned in for the night, each in our own bed, the unspoken incident hanging between us like a ghost. The next few days followed a similar pattern. We were polite to each other, even friendly, but there was a new awareness in our interactions, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. Jordan spent more time out of the room, and I found myself missing his presence, even the loud, disruptive aspects of it that had once driven me crazy. A week after the incident, as I had come to think of it, I returned from a late study session at the library to find Jordan sitting on his bed, looking uncharacteristically serious. He had clearly been waiting for me. "Hey," he said as I dropped my backpack on my desk chair. "Can we talk?" My heart immediately started racing. This was it. He was going to bring up that night. I sat down on my bed, facing him, trying to appear calm even as my palms began to sweat. "Sure. What's up?" Jordan ran a hand through his hair, that nervous gesture I'd come to recognize. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For last week. When So he did remember. And he knew that I knew. The relief of finally acknowledging it was almost overwhelming. "You mean when you crawled into my bed in the middle of the night?" I said, trying to keep my tone light. He winced. "Yeah, that. I was drunk, but not so drunk that I didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't fair to put you in that position without explaining myself." I waited, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "The truth is," he continued, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder, "Mike snores like a chainsaw. And our futon is incredibly uncomfortable. I was trying to get some sleep, and your bed seemed like the best option at the time." He finally met my gaze. I should have asked, or at least explained. "I'm sorry." I felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief. So it had been a practical decision, not a romantic one. I should have been glad. This was much less complicated than the scenarios I'd been imagining. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "It's okay," I said, forcing a smile. "No harm done." Jordan nodded, but he didn't look relieved. If anything, He seemed more tense than before. "There's something else," he said after a moment. "Something I've been wanting to tell you for a while now." The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I like you, Alex," he said simply. "As more than a roommate. As more than a friend." He let out a shaky breath. "And I hope, you might feel the same way." Time seemed to stop. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. Jordan liked me? Jordan, who could have anyone on campus, was interested in me? It seemed impossible, yet the vulnerability in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he waited for my response, told me he was being completely sincere. "Say something," he said after what felt like an eternity. "Even if it's to tell me I've completely misread the situation and made a fool of myself." I shook my head, finding my voice at last. "You haven't misread anything," I said. "I like you too. I have for a while now. I just never thought." I trailed off, still struggling to believe this was really happening. The smile that broke across Jordan's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Really?" he asked, sounding so genuinely surprised and happy that I couldn't help but laugh. "Really," I confirmed. "Though I have to say, there are more straightforward ways to let someone know you're interested than crawling into their bed in the middle of the night without explanation." He laughed too, the tension between us finally breaking. "I'll keep that in mind for future reference." He moved to sit beside me on my bed, close enough that our shoulders touched. "So what now?" It was a good question. We were roommates, which complicated things. If this didn't work out, we'd still have to live together for the rest of the academic year. But looking at Jordan, seeing the hope and affection in his eyes, I knew I wanted to take that risk. "Now," I said, gathering my courage, "I think you should kiss me. If you want to, that is." Jordan's smile turned softer, more intimate. "I definitely want to," he murmured, leaning in slowly, giving me plenty of time to change my mind. But I didn't change my mind. Instead, I met him halfway, our lips coming together in a kiss that was tentative at first, then more confident as we both realized this was exactly where we wanted to be. His hand came up to cup my face, and I felt myself melting into his touch, all the weeks of tension and uncertainty dissolving in the warmth of this moment. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jordan rested his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since the day we met," he admitted. "Even when I was yelling at you for being too loud." I teased. "Especially then," he said with a grin. "You're cute when you're angry." I shoved him playfully, and he caught my hand, interlacing our fingers. We sat like that for a while, talking about all the moments over the past few months when we'd each felt something but been too afraid to act on it. It was surreal to realize how many opportunities we'd missed, how many times we'd both held back out of fear of rejection or awkwardness. "So," Jordan said eventually, "does this mean I can sleep in your bed again? With permission this time?" I pretended to consider it. "I don't know. You do take up a lot of space. And what if Mike comes over again?" "I'll tell him to crash somewhere else," Jordan said seriously. "Or I'll invest in some really good earplugs for when he snores." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "We'll figure it out," I said, and I meant it. Whatever challenges came with dating my roommate, I was ready to face them. That night, Jordan did sleep in my bed. Both of us squeezed onto the narrow mattress, his arm around my waist, my head tucked under his chin. It wasn't the most comfortable arrangement. Dorm beds aren't made for two people, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment as we navigated our new relationship while maintaining our identities as individuals. Jordan was still social and sometimes loud. I still needed quiet time to study. But now, instead of these differences creating friction, they became opportunities for compromise and growth. Jordan would give me space when I needed to focus, and I made more of an effort to join him at social events, discovering that they could actually be fun when experienced with someone who made me feel safe and valued. Our friends had mixed reactions when they found out we were dating. Some weren't surprised at all, claiming they'd seen it coming from miles away. Others were concerned, warning us about the pitfalls of dating someone you lived with. But we took it one day at a time, learning each other's habits and quirks in a whole new context. There were challenges, of course. Our first fight as a couple was about the same issue that had always been a point of contention between us: Jordan's late-night returns disrupting my sleep. But now, instead of silently seething or blowing up, we talked it through. Jordan started texting me when he was going to be late, and I invested in a good pair of earplugs for those nights when he came back with friends. As the semester drew to a close, we faced a new dilemma. What would happen over the summer break? Jordan was heading back to his hometown on the West Coast, while I was staying on campus for a software development internship. The prospect of being apart for 3 months after having spent almost every day together was daunting. "We'll make it work," Jordan assured me as we packed up his side of the room. "There's FaceTime, and I'll come visit in July when my sister's wedding is over." I nodded, trying to be optimistic even as I helped him fold his clothes into his suitcase. "And I can come out to California in August before the fall semester starts." The day of his departure was harder than I expected. We stood outside the dorm, his taxi waiting to take him to the airport, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. "This isn't goodbye," Jordan said, reading my thoughts as he often did these days. "It's just see you later." I smiled despite the lump in my throat. "See you later, then?" He kissed me one last time before getting into the taxi, waving until the car turned the corner and disappeared from view. I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. If someone had told me at the beginning of the year that I would fall in love with my loud, party-loving roommate, I would have laughed in their face. Yet here I was, already counting the days until I would see him again. As I walked back to our now half-empty room, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of all the noise and chaos Jordan had brought into my once orderly life. Sometimes, it turned out, the things that initially drive you crazy are exactly what you end up missing the most when they're gone. And sometimes, a person crawling into your bed without explanation is the beginning of the best thing that's ever happened to you. Total_char_count, 17,886.